Good morning. Good morning, you guys, and welcome. How many of you have heard Vivaldi before? Anybody familiar with Vivaldi? Yeah, okay. Well, isn't it great to come to church and be exposed to this wonderful, wonderful music? They are. They're most attentive. Most attentive, yeah. It's always so wonderful to see you and to have you with us here in church, in this chapel. And you know what we're going to talk about this morning? We're going to talk about the difference between right and wrong. Now, is that an easy subject for you? Do you always know the difference between what is right and what is wrong? Do you know? Anybody? Is that? I mean, how many here know the difference between right and wrong? Anybody? Yeah. All right. So you all kind of know it. It's, you know, what makes it hard sometimes is that if you know what is right, and yet all your friends are doing something that you feel is not right, what are you going to do then? Are you going to go with your own feelings of what is right, or you still kind of want to be popular and hang out with your friends, and so you'll do something that's perhaps not right? How would you handle that? Yeah, go ahead. Stick to your own feelings. Good for you. That can be hard sometimes, right? Yeah. Okay. Well, let me tell you a very quick, absolutely true story about a famous Unitarian minister from the middle of the 19th century, Theodore Parker. And he, when he was about your age, and he kind of lived in the country, and he went out to play, and there were a bunch of his friends, and there was kind of a creek and a lake and all that kind of stuff. And you know what his friends were doing when he finally caught up to them? They were taking rocks and throwing them at frogs. They were doing target practice at frogs. And now, do you think that's right or wrong? Wrong, yeah. And Theodore Parker thought, that's not right. But all his friends were doing it. And if he didn't throw rocks at frogs, he might be ostracized, or they may not like him anymore because he wasn't one of them. He was snooty. He was above throwing rocks at frogs. So what he did was, he thought, I am going to join my friends. And this is what happened. He picked up a rock, and he took aim at a frog, and he went, couldn't do it. He later described that event as though something was holding his arm back. He just couldn't do it. And that scared him, because he really wanted to do it, but something was holding his arm back. So he dropped the rock, and he ran home to his mom, crying. The strangest thing happened, Mom. I was going to do what all the other kids were doing, and I was going to take a rock and throw it at a frog, and something held me back. And is that a hearing aid, or is that the microphone, or okay? It's that mystical thing that is us. Okay. So he tells his mom, I was going to throw this rock, and I couldn't do it. Something held my hand back. And you know what she said? She said, Teddy, that's what she called Theodore Parker. She called him Teddy. Teddy, that is what is called conscience. Your conscience knows what is right, what is wrong, regardless of what your friends are doing. You got to figure this out for yourself and listen to your conscience, that inner voice, and that will always help you do the right thing. Okay? So now we're going to do the right thing, and that is lighting our chalice. And we are going to have the Haynes family, including Armin. Armin, are you ready to play with fire? Okay. And Eva, you going to join? No? Okay. Okay.
symbol of light, symbol of knowledge, symbol of warmth, symbol of freedom. We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. Here we gather to celebrate hope and the infinite possibilities of love.
Can we open up our hymn books, please, to number 123, Spirit of Love.
It was dark once again when I woke this morning, and I needed that extra cup of coffee to get going. And yet, I heard the sounds of birds singing in the trees on my way in. And when I opened my office door, I could smell the hyacinth blooming on my windowsill. For me, an hour of lost sleep is a small thing to exchange for these signs of spring, the earth coming back to life, restored in beauty, eternally renewed. When spring arrives, it seems like so much more than simply the earth revolving in her course among the stars. Those first breaths of warmth wake us from our winter slumber and defy the inertia of sitting indoors. So before we consider the topic of critical thinking this morning, let's pause for a quiet moment of irrational exuberance. Let us spend a moment this morning in silent gratitude that we have been blessed to see another springtime, that the earth has not forgotten us, that we belong to her, and that it is good to be alive. Hear these words from Kate McPhee. Around us, light is returning. It rekindles the spirit of life in the skeletons of trees. It brings forth new shoots from the soil. It wakes us from our winter hibernation and invites us to see what lies beyond. Blessed be. All right, now let's put that irrational exuberance in our pocket for a little while we talk about critical thinking. I've brought you a reading this morning from The Righteous Mind by social scientist Jonathan Haidt. Moral judgment is a cognitive process, as are all forms of judgment. The crucial distinction is really between two kinds of cognition: intuition and reasoning. Moral emotions are one type of moral intuition, but most intuitions are more subtle. They don't rise to the level of emotions. The next time you read a newspaper or drive a car, notice the many tiny flashes of condemnation that flit through your consciousness. Is each flash such an emotion? Or ask yourself whether it is better to save the lives of 5 strangers or 1, assuming all else is equal. Do you need an emotion to tell you to go for the 5? Do you need reasoning? No, you just see instantly that 5 is better than 1. Intuition is the best word to describe the dozens or hundreds of rapid, effortless moral judgments and decisions that we all make every day. Only a few of these intuitions come to us embedded in full-blown emotions. Let us call these two kinds of cognition the rider, that is, controlled processes, including reasoning, and the elephant, automatic processes, including emotion and intuition. I chose an elephant rather than a horse because elephants are so much bigger and smarter than horses. Automatic processes run the human mind, just as they have been running animal minds for 500 million years. So they're very good at what they do, like software that has been improved through thousands of product cycles. When human beings evolved the capacity for language and reasoning at some point in the last million years, the brain did not rewire itself to hand over the reins to a new and inexperienced charioteer. Rather, the rider, language-based reasoning, evolved because it did something useful for the elephant. Most important, the rider acts as spokesperson for the elephant, even though it doesn't necessarily know what the elephant is really thinking. The rider is skilled at fabricating post hoc explanations for whatever the elephant has just done, and it is good at finding reasons to justify whatever the elephant wants to do next. Reason is the servant of the intuitions. So, if you want to change people's minds, you've got to talk to their elephants. It's such an obvious point, yet few of us apply it in moral and political arguments because our righteous minds so readily shift into combat mode. Empathy is an antidote to righteousness, although it's very difficult to empathize across a moral divide. But if you really want to change someone's mind on a moral or political matter, you'll need to see things from that person's angle as well as your own.
Sure would like to thank our guest musicians this morning, Cassie Olson and Rick Nobis. Thank you both for being here this morning. If I were to write a handbook on how to run a pledge drive, my sage advice at the very beginning would be do not open your pledge drive when there's a snow blizzard happening, descending from the skies. It's not a good idea. But somehow we still managed to get 85, as of now, 85 pledging families, which means we usually have about 285 pledging families to keep the church afloat. And so please, after the service, the pledge cards will be available, and I want you, at least in your mind, pretend it's a great kickoff of Celebration Sunday, and you're really enthusiastic, and just be so kind as to fill out a pledge card to help this very, very busy congregation continue with its work. One of the things that we are involved in, of course, is providing sanctuary, and so I want everybody to know that following this service, there will be a kind of a tune-up, a way for those who host here to be trained a little bit more and learn a little bit more about what that entails. And so at 12:30, just run an hour, no more. Meet in the little chapel and just see how we can improve upon hosting here as for our sanctuary family. Also want to mention, and this is very important, that next Saturday there will be a march and rally in support of not only our guests but the whole need to change the immigration laws. We're going to be meeting somewhere between 9:30 and 10 in the morning at President's Circle at the U, and then march right here to First Unitarian Church, where we'll have a bunch of speakers and an opportunity to really get to know this wider community a little bit better. And please make a point of joining in this march, protest, rally. It's important for you to be there. Next Sunday in the afternoon, South Valley, our sister church, the south end of the valley, will be having a special fundraiser, a choral concert written by their music director. And some of our choir people will join the South Valley Choir. So it's always a lot of fun when the choirs come together and perform. And so just take a note. You may very well want to be down there next Sunday at 5 o'clock at South Valley. Also next Sunday, our Social Justice Council will meet. It's not a closed group, but in fact, everybody is invited, and hope you're able to attend that. And last but not least, a week from tomorrow, UU orientation. Is there a registration form available for the orientation? Yes. On the Congregational Life table, please sign up if you're new or newish, or you just want to learn a little bit more about Unitarian history and theology and have some basic questions you want answered. Be sure to come a week from tomorrow, 7 o'clock. Sign up so we have an idea of how many are coming, how many might need childcare, and it's important to get a number so we know just how much wine we need to have on hand. At this time, the offering will gratefully be received, a chance to greet one another and bid each other a good morning despite daylight savings time. In June of 2016, I was invited to Phoenix to officiate a wedding for one of my son's best friends. Although June is not the optimal time to be in Phoenix, the ceremony went off without a hitch, and after some cocktails and hors d'oeuvres, I was seated among friends of the family for dinner. And it was really lovely until my neighbor, seated to my left, decided he had suffered through enough superficial conversation and spontaneously began to regale me with the virtues of Donald Trump. Now, I'm really pretty good at diverting conversation that I don't wish to enter, but he persevered like a pit bull. And so having no choice, really, and wishing to keep my integrity as a progressive thinker, I entered the fray. So the temperature inside the reception hall around my table was hotter than the temperature outside, which was really pretty hot. I remember the tap on my right shoulder. It was my son, who asked if he could speak to me privately for a moment. So politely I excused myself and went for a bit of a walk, where my son strenuously invited me to join his table for the rest of the evening. He noticed, and I'm using his words, that I was a bit too animated. God, was my son giving me a timeout? I don't know, that's what it felt like. The gentleman with whom I had this political discussion was a well-educated medical researcher, so I couldn't just dismiss him as a stupid guy. He wasn't even particularly religious. He was merely convinced that Obama, who ostensibly he said he voted for in 2008, had led our nation down the tubes, and that Trump was the only one who could reverse our misfortunes. Stormy Daniels was still an unknown at that time. Aside from our different opinions, I noticed in a rather almost brutally stark fashion that our conversation, realistically, seemed utterly futile. It was not only that we could never change each other's mind, but that there was this impenetrable wall that just stood between us. We might as well have been from two different planets, totally disconnected from one another's perception of reality. And long after that dinner, I was really bothered by my total ineffectiveness in the conversation, despite using logic, compassion, and tragic examples from history which were about to be repeated if his candidate got elected. Neither of us gave a sliver of merit to the other's point of view. We hit a dead end. Now, shortly after the election, our Social Justice Council here at the church gave a list of concerns that they wanted to address in the coming year, and one of their top priorities, in fact, the top priority, was learning how to dialogue with the other side. How do we have a conversation with Trump supporters? And I thought that this ambitious goal was, well, minimally ironic, but being the humble minister that I am, I agreed to facilitate a church-wide discussion about how can we converse with people on the other side of the cultural divide. Well, we ended up having 3 gatherings, and it started really well, certainly on the right foot, learning new methods of communication, listening more deeply, speaking more sympathetically, withholding judgments. And we had 40 or more people attending that first session. The second session, we had about 30 people. And then in the last session, we had about 20, where we decided it was the whole discussion was pointless, and we need not continue with this unsuccessful mission. So this well-intentioned plan to learn how to speak to folks the other side of the divide just disintegrated. We had essentially given up, thrown in the towel. And I was not particularly happy with simply giving up, because too many families from our congregation and their friends were being torn apart, not only because of different points of view, but immensely conflicting worldviews, which proved gut-wrenchingly painful and deeply, deeply emotional. Now, holding different opinions is one thing, but challenging the very essence of one's being as a threat to the nation, proclaiming that those on the other side of the divide lack all virtue and common decency, revealed just how dangerous this divide really was, and also exposed the consequences for maintaining this rift into the future. Not good. Now, obviously, I can't present a perfect solution to this grievous impasse in society, which contains, at least I think, every bit of the venom that was manifest in the Civil War, 1860. And with the increased stockpiling of guns today, including military assault weapons, and the language imposed about safeguarding against a government of tyranny, I worry about the future direction of our country. And right now, the battleground seems to be the courts, but who knows what the battleground will be tomorrow. Perhaps my ministry through the decades is responsible for my particular lens through which I see our drastic, if not dire, situation today. For me, the underlying basis of this painfully treacherous division nationwide rests with a lack of understanding moral development. And that's going to be a concept we're going to flush out a little bit more this morning. Just basically, we don't have just one set of morals from birth through death. Morality grows, morality develops as we mature, morality changes. It's not just this fixed thing. Our so-called cultural divisions are not due simply to different ideas about immigration, gun control, climate change, diplomacy, economics, poverty, race, but rather that our divisions are rooted in and influenced by totally different concepts of morality. That's so important because our moral constructs impact the way we think about how society works effectively. By claiming that we just hold a different moral compass misses the point. And so I want to just take a moment to not define our terms, but just really kind of get on the same page with understanding and hopefully agreeing about some very key pivotal terms. First off, a person who knows the difference between right and wrong is moral. Okay? So a moral person is someone who knows, intellectually knows the difference between right and wrong. A person whose morality is reflected in his or her willingness to do the right thing is ethical. Ethics are moral values in action. Let me say that again. A person who knows the difference between right and wrong is moral. A person whose morality is reflected in his or her willingness to
do the right thing is ethical. Ethics are moral values in action. Now, the tableau of values, not ethics, different values are manifest on both sides of the divide. Jonathan Haidt, who we had the privilege of hearing a little bit this morning from Monica's reading, is indeed a social scientist, a professor now at NYU, and he spends a lot of his research and efforts to understand our different values. He gives a great example of two visitors to Florence, Italy, who stumble upon Michelangelo's statue of David. Now, one of the visitors immediately sees this great beauty in the statue and admires how artistically innovative it was, considering this is early Renaissance. The statue is from about 1500. So he says, wow, isn't this beautiful and stunning? And the other visitor, is immediately embarrassed, just embarrassed by the nakedness of the statue. And this visitor pines for more familiar art forms that express traditional values. And so Jonathan Haidt asks, which of these two visitors do you think voted for Donald Trump? He makes an obvious point. Liberals are more open in seeking a deeper understanding of the world, while conservatives want to preserve the traditional, finding comfort in what is familiar, preserving purity, and thus willing to suppress carnality in all forms. Now, 5 values have been identified by Jonathan Haidt as pivotal in how we opt to exercise our values, put them in motion. Now, ethics, don't forget, are moral values in action. Of those 5 values, 2 of them are decidedly liberal. 1, discerning between harming and caring for people, all people, caring for people universally. The second one, seeking fairness or justice for all people. That's the liberal base of values. Conservatives, the final 3 for the conservatives, what they value, 1, group loyalty, which resembles a tribal psychology. And I think the best example we have of this is, for us, the stunning way that the Republican Congress keeps supporting the president. We say, you hear over and over again, my God, they're so spineless. Why don't they stand up for what is right, so forth? They're just working with what they perceive as a great value from their perspective, and that, of course, is group loyalty. That's where they're coming from, group loyalty. They also are interested or value authority, and all authority needs to be respected. And then the third one is purity, which represents stability and traditional values of sanctity. So you put it all together, one side displays a concern for a cooperative society where all people are cared for. What a concept. While the other side values social order, even at the expense of those who are barely hanging on at the very bottom of the rung, society's ladder, just on the bottom. So you have, on one side, an openness to change, and that clashes with a desire for stability imposed by an authority, so there's only one view to adhere to. It makes it easy. We can be loyal to that one view. Following example is a good one. Imagine the Humane Society trying to find a home for a dog. It's not an ordinary dog. It's a dog that has a reputation for being just brutally, independently minded. Now, conservatives who value loyalty and deplore independent thinking, especially about dogs, in all likelihood, they would never take the dog home. The liberal person, however, would welcome the independently minded dog, for liberals gravitate to independent thinking to the point where a liberal will throw a stick and say to the dog, "Go fetch, please?" What a difference. Now, the trouble that I have with Jonathan Haidt is that he merely lays bare different values sought by different kinds of people, which result in different political differences. But we would be further helped if we understood why some values are more appealing to others. What is the moral grounding of those who ultimately look to justice for their moral compass? How do I act in the world? I think more universally, and just want to be caring, provide justice. Others never move beyond group loyalty. Okay, that's their true north, group loyalty. So let's revisit our premise. A person who knows the difference between right and wrong is moral. The pathway, however, in discriminating right from wrong and getting right into motion in terms of an ethical life, that avenue that is responsible for launching this, okay? So intellectually we know what's right and wrong. The avenue by which we are able to take what is right and move it into a kind of reality is critical thinking. Critical thinking is, by definition, independent thinking. Okay? Sort of like the story I told the kids this morning, Theodore Parker. It was only as an independent thinker, aside from what all his friends were doing, throwing stones at the frogs, as an independent thinker, he knew this was wrong. Right? So really at an early age, very atypical, he was already a critical thinker. So critical thinking entails the ability to think clearly about the values in deciding how to act, or in this case, deciding how not to act. Rather than act in accordance with what your family believes or what your religious leaders tell you to believe, or peers pressure you to believe, critical thinking takes you away from influences exerted by familiar groups in which you have placed your trust for a very long time. The critical thinker forms her or his own judgment. Now, this kind of independent thinking was first clearly articulated by none other than Socrates, who some 2,400 years ago said that the unexamined life is not worth living. Now, we hear that phrase quite a bit, but what do you think he really meant by that? I mean, going so far as to say the unexamined life is not worth living, that's a pretty heavy claim. Now, what I believe Socrates meant was that by examining life choices carefully, we can't help but notice our tendencies to be drawn foremost to satisfying our own needs. We have these desires, and by nature, we're pretty self-absorbed or greedy. What we want to do in life is fulfill our own desires. It's perfectly natural. But what we need is a bit more objectivity in order to make good ethical choices. We need to transcend our greed, which is the distinguishing quality of being human. For example, would a lion refuse to kill an antelope out of concern for the offspring of the prey? Well, obviously not. But the human has the capacity to act against his or her own instincts and desires. Humans who can be critical thinkers realize certain kinds of behavior are wrong. Okay. So we go from this instinct of being purely self-serving to understanding, well, yeah, what about the offspring? What about, what are we doing to the environment? Can we think about the children and the grandchildren who are going to inherit this? I mean, that's what it means, really, to be able to be critical and form your own judgment. Now, those who do not examine life choices carefully fail to live a life that is fully human. And isn't that what Socrates really meant? To be fully human, you got to examine life carefully. And yet, being fully human can be extremely challenging. I mean, isn't there a certain attraction to not examine your life all that fully? Because you may end up acting against your own best interests. Redistributing wealth is a prime example. Do I really want to tap into, my fortunes, my largesse, in order to help others? I may not want to consider justice values all too carefully. It's going to hurt my pocketbook. Broadly speaking, we're looking at a difference between those who want to change society by applying justice values more fairly, and then there are those who opt for stability in society, which is best enforced by those in authority who can impose order. Jonathan Haidt wants to conclude that there are different kinds of morality. Liberals adhere to one, conservatives to another. And his summary is that we need what he calls moral humility, so we don't think that our brand of morality is the only one that's legitimate. That's fine up to a point, but for me the issue is not different kinds of morality, that some people have adopted this kind of morality, other people have adopted that kind of morality. I believe that we all, every one of us, we all have the capacity to know right from wrong and to do the right thing, which means we all have the human capacity to transcend selfish aims that we carry as individuals. We all have the human capacity to express our concern for the children, like the example of the lion who instinctively devours the antelope. But we can act ethically out of our concern for the children whose families society has devoured. They have no health insurance, no home, no food, no safety net, no chance. But by setting moral values in motion, we can do what the lion cannot do. We have that capacity. That's the distinguishing mark of simply being human. We make a mistake, I believe, in believing that we are born with a complete set of moral values, ready to apply them throughout a lifetime. Instead of perceiving morality as this package deal, kind of flat, kind of static, morality, for all human beings on the face of the planet, morality goes through different stages of development. Lawrence Kohlberg and other developmental psychologists identify what they call stages of moral development. For Kohlberg, there happen to be 6 stages of development, others have 5, but they really all come into full agreement that as young children, moral reasoning is solely concerned with the self, totally preoccupied with the me in a very egocentric manner. And then as kids get older, morality changes a little bit. It's not all about you. They move to the next stage where reasoning shows a limited interest in others, but only to a point where it may further the individual's own interests. And this is kind of known as the I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. And by the third stage, usually reached, this is so important, in adolescence, the self enters society wishing to conform to societal standards. And we all of us, everyone here has gone through that stage 3. Individuals are receptive to approval or disapproval from others as it reflects society's views. You want to be a good girl, you want to be a good boy, to live up to the expectation of others as to how best to conform to the rules of society. This is a moral life, conforming to the rules of society. And then the next stage is absolutely obedience-driven. It is important, valued as good, it's important to obey the laws, obey dictums and social conventions because of their importance in maintaining a functioning society. So this 4th stage of moral development is where most people are stuck. On that 4th stage, on this fixed stage of moral development, which is really law and order, we find, when you come to think about it, it's just natural, we find those who are dead set against immigrants, let alone offering sanctuary. Their argument, rooted from their tableau of values, is society cannot function if laws are broken. Case is closed. That's the way it goes. It is at this time, mostly during adolescence. Adolescence is so key. And why sending a child to college, especially if it's not a religious college, why that is so threatening to more conservative thinking. It is at this time, late high school, early college, that critical thinking finally has the chance to emerge. The adolescent is ready to learn that individuals are separate entities from society, and that the individual's own perspective may take precedence over society's view. Individuals may disobey rules inconsistent with their own principles. Their principles, values emerge that include basic human rights, liberty, freedom, justice. They get this wider, larger perspective. Rules are not absolute dictates that must be obeyed without question. You're able to, once you make your own judgments, once you're able to be a critical thinker, you see beyond those rules imposed by society. And we can develop even more fully in the last stages of moral development, where we can become, at the very top of this ladder of moral development. You'll find people like Gandhi or Dr. Martin Luther King. They are selfless beyond what most of us could possibly ever imagine. Now, so the first 3 stages of moral reasoning for all of us are selfishly motivated. Then, with the introduction of critical thinking, when we begin to examine our lives as Socrates advocated, we gain perspectives beyond the self and see more clearly the need to apply justice universally. And so we have this chance then, through critical thinking, to move on to a higher stage of moral development. And that's why, the current administration is so adamant about not supporting higher education, and why they really want to dilute or eliminate scientific evidence, why we have this war on science, because they perceive it as a threat. It is a threat to critical thinking. All means, all avenues that lead to critical thinking, the current administration, conservative in general, would argue, must be abrogated to sustain the current law and order authoritarian government that helps preserve traditional society. That's where we are right now. In a very, government that's very stage 3, stage 4, law and order, don't rock the boat. Got to understand This is all stage 4 reasoning, and our Constitution is written really in a stage 5 language, and so we've got stage 3 and 4 people in government trying to interpret stage 5 rhetoric, such as our Constitution. Group loyalty. Scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. Purity, sanctity, stability. That's what seems to count. Stage 3, stage 4. Individual thinking is described as disloyal and elitist. Cutting yourself off from the group, separating yourself from others. What are you, an elitist? No. We need to have this group think. We need to understand, I think, that the people on the other side of the divide never moved beyond stage 3 or stage 4 in their moral development. A very significant portion of Americans are situated, again, stuck on stage 3 or stage 4. And I think it's so important for us to use this moral development as a framework which will help us somehow, some way, bridging the divide. Because we need to understand, first of all, that arguing with a stage 3 person is pointless. There are just two different realities. And instead of fighting and arguing, we need to encourage independent thinking, underscoring the value of critical thinking rather than tribal thinking. We must also point out that as human beings, we all have the capacity to move beyond our own self-interest. We all have the capacity to be objective and to know the difference between right and wrong. And then we can encourage doing the right thing and setting unselfish values into action. Our only hope, as I see it, is moving the needle from group loyalty to independent thinking. Easy? No, not at all. My hope, my very humble hope, is to change the discourse just enough so we can have more of us continue to develop morally. We've got to somehow open up the cap that are keeping people down on stage 3 and stage 4 and welcome them to expand moral reasoning, to be a bit more inclusive, more sensitive to consequences for the next couple of generations, and to be more focused on a better life, a more just life for all. I hope we can move the conversation. Right now, may we close our service, turning our hymn books, please, to number 300. As we extinguish the chalice, so may we go out into the world and enlarge our compassion, nurture our minds. May heart and head unite and expand our ability to see the truth, to proclaim the truth, and to act upon the truth. Amen.
Thank you. Rick, Cassie, thank you. Thank you so very much. Vivaldi always brightens the day. Let us break for coffee, conversation. Please do not forget to go by the pledge table. In fact, you might even be tripped as you walk by there. And also take a look at how we can volunteer our time in helping with Sanctuary. Thank you so much for being here this morning.